I look cute. Shopkins, Shopkins. Once you shop, you can't stop. That was the slogan of my favorite brand as a child. And yes, pushing addiction to little children may not be the most moral thing a brand can do. It sure did get me. I had hundreds, much to my mother's dismay, and I held on to them so tightly. I mean, I love the little things. Putting faces on various food items, there's not a better idea in the world. But I quickly grew out of them, and I started going after boys instead. So while they collected dust, I had nothing else left to do with them. But my little niece wanted them. And even though it was very hard to part with all of my little strawberries and kiwis and lemons, I still gave them to her, because I wanted to be the favorite aunt. Now, this instance perfectly mirrors the phrase for today, sign of the times. And what we can take this to mean is that when the end is near, it's very careful and very important to always understand what the next step is going to be. We can see this in many instances, but today we'll be focusing in on 3 key ones, starting with the metamorphosis, then traveling over to the scientific revolution, before finally ending with everyone's favorite, One Direction. So let's step into Franz Kafka's wonderful novel, critically acclaimed in fact, Metamorphosis. In this short story, Gregor Samsa wakes up as a bug. Yes, a 5'4" cockroach. What is his family to do? Gregor is a traveling salesman, and he's the one who's the real breadwinner in his family. They all rely on him, and they all live in the apartment. The family is stuck. They have no idea what to do. They love Gregor. As a son, as a brother, he's someone who means so much to them. But they're confused. They aren't ready for this new change, this new absurdity in their life, and they don't know how to handle it. So for painstaking months, Gregor stays locked up in his room as a big fat cockroach who can't communicate with his family. And he's really left to distress. His whole family becomes angered with him. In fact, his father throws an apple at him that becomes lodged in his back as a reminder for the constant pain that Gregor causes for them. And they're torn apart. The whole family is at each other's throats because of Gregor and his transformation. They aren't ready to adapt, and they hold on for far too long, which ends up hurting themselves. But in the end, they realize that this is ridiculous. Why do they have a huge cockroach living with them in their apartment? So they finally drive Gregor out, and he dies in the end. And the family steps out of their apartment for the first time in months because they understood that it was a sign of the times. They needed to move on from Gregor and move on what was coming to cause them pain so they could go on to better things in their life, in which they did. And once they finally reached this conclusion, they were able to finally be happy. But let's take it back a couple hundred centuries and let's go to the scientific revolution, everyone's favorite AP Euro subject. So in the scientific revolution, it was a new era and a new dawn. Finally, discoveries like the heliocentric theory and about human anatomy and physiology were coming to light. This was wonderful for everyone except for the church. Now, the church had a lot of power in spreading misinformation and holding the Bible to a certain standard to exact their own political agenda. So the church didn't want to move on with the times. The scientific revolution was upon us, and people were starting to understand that the earth orbited around the sun, not the other way around. So because of this, people were starting to change. They were ready to go with the revolution. They understood it was a sign of the times, and they were ready to make that change and move on to the next big thing that would propel society into new heights. But the church wanted to hold on to that power, and because of this, they lost it. They lost their reputation, and they lost some of their patronage due to this. So because the church was not able to recognize the sign of the times, they lost some of their power. But the people from and willing to support the scientific revolution were able to move on, move to new heights, and make a ton of new inventions and innovations in this world. But now, what everyone's been waiting for, what makes you beautiful? One Direction was a band founded by Simon Cowell in 2012 off the show X Factor. They all auditioned to their songs, and these 5 boys were able to be scooped up by Simon Cowell to sign a huge record deal. In the following 5 years, they came up with 5 different albums that were all chart stoppers. I mean, everyone knows Steal My Girl, right? Yeah. And because of this, One Direction reached whole new levels of fame. They were in every teenage girl's bedroom. In fact, Harry Styles is my shower curtain. But the boys were overworked. 5 albums in 5 years is absolutely ridiculous. So it caused a lot of anxiety between the boys and a lot of rift. And eventually they had to break up and go in different directions. They understood it was a sign of the times. They knew that they were hurting themselves in the end, so they wanted to make a point to go into their solo careers to reach new heights. And Harry Styles even wrote a song about this, Sign of the Times. Very fitting. So because they understood who they were as people and what they needed to do, they were ready to move on with their lives, and they were ready to adapt to this new change and a perfect time to launch their solo careers. All in all, it's always important to understand when it's time to move on, when the final show is here, to move on for the sign of the times. As we've seen in Metamorphosis, in which Gregor's family was able to move on from the plight that this cockroach was causing them, but with the scientific revolution, in which the church wasn't able to, but the people who were ready to move on were, and they were able to prosper. But finally with One Direction, each 5 having their own solo careers and own personal lives that were able to flourish after leaving One Direction. So, all in all, it's so important to know when it's time and when the time is up and it's the end of an era. So maybe if you have your own Shopkins collection, it's time to let it go.